Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into some really fascinating ideas today, all inspired by, believe it or not, the humble Serviceberry.
It's pretty amazing how this little berry can make us rethink our whole relationship with resources and value.
I love that.
Yeah.
So before we get too far, can you remind us, what exactly is a Serviceberry? I know it goes by a few other names too, right?
Yeah, you might know it as a Saskatoon, Juneberry, or shadbush, depending on where you're from. But no matter what you call it, the serviceberry, well, it holds a special place in many cultures and ecosystems.
And in this deep dive, we're exploring the ideas in Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She uses the Serviceberry as a metaphor for, get this, gift economies.
Exactly. And that might sound a little strange at first, right? Gift economies. What are those?
Yeah, most of us are used to thinking about, well, the economy. Money, buying and selling.
Right, the kind of market economy we're all familiar with. It's all about scarcity, competition, and looking out for number one.
Every man for himself kind of thing.
Exactly. But gift economies operate from a completely different premise. They're all about abundance, generosity, and the understanding that there's enough to go around when we prioritize the well-being of the community as a whole.
So instead of every man for himself, it's more like we're all in this together.
Exactly. It's a total shift from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset.
So how does the Serviceberry fit into all of this?
Well, Kimmerer uses the serviceberry to illustrate this concept beautifully. She talks about how during harvest season, serviceberries are just abundant everywhere. Picking them feels like, well, receiving a gift, not something you've earned or bought.
Oh, that reminds me of when I was a kid picking wild blackberries. It really did feel like nature was just offering up all this deliciousness, no strings attached.
Exactly, that feeling, that sense of receiving a gift, it's at the heart of a gift economy.
I'm starting to get it, but I'm curious. How does this gift economy thing actually work in the real world? I mean, beyond just picking berries, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Kimmerer gives some really great examples, even in our modern market-driven world.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of examples?
Well, think about things like community gardens, or those take a book, leave a book shelves you see in cafes, or even something as simple as helping a neighbor with yard work.
I see. So it's about those small acts of generosity and sharing.
Precisely. And, even these small acts can create a ripple effect. They build community, foster trust, and really strengthen the social fabric.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yes. When we come from a place of abundance and generosity, it benefits everyone. Kimmerer actually tells this really powerful story about a linguist studying a hunter-gatherer tribe in the Amazon. The linguist, trying to understand their economic system, asked a hunter how he planned to store his extra meat.
Okay, I'm hooked. What did the hunter say?
His response was amazing. He said, "Store my meat. I store my meat in the belly of my brother."
Wow. Talk about a powerful statement.
Yeah.
So it's not about hoarding and accumulating. It's about sharing to make sure everyone has what they need.
Exactly. And it makes you realize how ingrained our market-driven mindset is. We're so used to thinking about competition and scarcity, that we forget another way of relating to each other and the world is even possible.
It's like we've been taught to see the world as a pie. And if someone else gets a bigger slice, it means there's less for us. But what if it wasn't a pie? What if it was more like a garden? Where abundance can be cultivated and shared.
I love that analogy. And that's the beauty of Kimmerer's work, right? She doesn't just focus on the problem. She offers these concrete examples and inspires us to imagine a different way of being.
A future where we actually recognize and appreciate the Earth's abundance and then, well, act in ways that make sure everyone has what they need.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time, we were talking about how different market economies are from gift economies, and how even something like a serviceberry can change how we think about, value and resources and things.
Yeah, it was pretty mind-blowing to realize just how much we think, like everything has to have a price tag, even clean water or fresh air. It's kind of crazy when you think about it like that.
It really is. I think that's what makes Kimmerer's ideas about gift economies so refreshing. It's like she's reminding us that there's a whole other way to exist in the world, one that's built on generosity, reciprocity, and that deep connection with the natural world.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, there's this one concept from braiding sweetgrass I really wanted to dig into today. It's called the honorable harvest.
Ah, yes, the honorable harvest. It's a set of ethical guidelines, for how to interact with the earth. It comes from indigenous wisdom, and it's a really powerful way to think about how we can live sustainably.
So it's more than just, gathering food or resources. It's a whole philosophy that shapes how we interact with everything. Other people, nature, the whole world.
Exactly. And Kimmerer expresses this philosophy so beautifully through a series of guidelines. Like one of them is know the ways of the ones who take care of you so that you can take care of them.
Hmm. So it's about understanding what what the plants and animals we rely on, what they need,
Hmm.
and making sure that we're taking care of them too, like giving back for what they give to us.
Right. It's not just about taking, it's about reciprocity. It's about understanding that, that we depend on the health of the whole ecosystem for our own
Like
survival.
we're all connected.
Exactly. And there's another guideline that's really powerful too. It's never take the first, never take the last.
Oh yeah, that one really stuck with me. It's about like having that restraint, that respect. We don't just gobble up everything in sight. We leave some for others, for the future, for balance.
Exactly. And this applies to, well, not just our relationship with nature, but with each other too. In a gift economy, it's about sharing our resources, skills, even our time, without necessarily expecting something in return. It's that understanding that by contributing to the well-being of, well, the whole, we all benefit in the end.
Like what goes around comes around.
Exactly. Kimmerer shares this story about her father's daily ritual. He would pour the first cup of coffee onto the ground as an offering of gratitude to the earth. Such a simple act, but so powerful.
I love that. It's like ceremony doesn't have to be this big elaborate thing. You can be woven into everyday life.
Absolutely. And that reminds me, I actually started doing something similar. Before I eat, I take a moment to appreciate the food, think about, all the work that went into growing it, preparing it, all the hands and forces that made it possible. It's a small thing, but it helps me shift my perspective.
I like that. Small things can make a big difference.
Mm.
So okay, how do we actually put these principles into practice? Like in real life, it can feel kind of daunting, right? Shifting from a market-driven mind to a gift-based one. Like, where do we even begin?
Oh, that's a great question. And Kimura doesn't say we need to completely abandon the market economy. It's more about, well, finding ways to cultivate gift economies alongside it, creating spaces for generosity and reciprocity to exist even within the system.
So those small acts of sharing we talked about earlier, like the community gardens, the libraries, the helping a neighbor, those are all part of it.
Exactly. It's all about starting small, planting those seeds, and nurturing that mindset of abundance and generosity little by little. And well, as we do that, we might just inspire others to do the same.
Those little ripples in the pond spreading outward.
Yes. And you brought up those big issues like poverty, inequality, the environment. And it's a valid question. Can these gift economies actually tackle those challenges?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like, it's great to be nice and share, but what about those bigger systemic problems?
Well, Kimmerer acknowledges that gift economies, they can't exist in a vacuum. They need a foundation of social justice, of ecological justice. It's not enough to just be kind to each other. We have to address the systems that create these problems in the first place.
So we can't just ignore the systems that create scarcity and exploitation.
Right. It's a both hands situation. We need individual acts of generosity, and we need to work towards a world where everyone has what they need to thrive: food, shelter, healthcare, education. We have to get to the root of the problem, not just put band-aids on the symptoms.
It's like a multi-pronged approach. We're planting those seeds at a local level, while also working to change those bigger systems. And speaking of which, I remember Kimmerer talking about reskilling. What was that all about?
Ah, reskilling. It's about reclaiming those traditional skills, like making and mending and sharing, things that have been lost in our consumer culture, like learning to grow our own food, fix our own clothes, build things ourselves.
So it's about becoming more self-reliant, less dependent on a system that often isn't sustainable or ethical.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our power to provide for ourselves and our communities. And it's also about strengthening those community bonds. When we can do things for ourselves and for each other, we're less reliant on a system that, well, that might not have our best interests in mind.
I see, I see. So we're not just, being nice and sharing, we're also taking back some control.
Right. And Kimmerer also talks about the challenges that come with gift economies, Like she tells a story about a community-free farm stand that was stolen.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. It was so sad. It really shows how greed and a lack of respect can hurt even the most well-intentioned efforts.
It does. It makes you wonder, How can we protect these gift economies, these spaces of generosity from being taken advantage of?
Exactly. How do we make sure that kindness isn't exploited?
It's a tough question. But Kimmerer points to the work of Eleanor Ostrom. She won a Nobel Prize for showing that shared resources like land or water, they can be managed sustainably through community cooperation and trust.
So it's not just about individuals being ethical, it's about creating systems that support that culture of sharing.
Right. And Ostrom's work, it gives us some really valuable insights into how to actually design those systems. Things like making sure communication is clear, that everyone feels a sense of responsibility, and that there are good ways to resolve conflicts.
It's good to know that there are examples of commons management that actually work. Gives me hope that we can, create a world where gift economies can thrive.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that the wisdom we need to create a more just and sustainable world, well, it often comes from those communities and cultures that have already been practicing these principles for generations.
And speaking of wisdom, Kimmerer also shares some amazing examples of how indigenous cultures have been managing resources sustainably for centuries, like the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, I think she called them.
Yes. They're also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, and they have this really interesting system of governance. It's based on consensus and a deep respect for the seven generations to come.
Wow. So they make decisions with the long term in mind, thinking about how it will impact future generations.
Yeah, it's
Not exactly. Not exactly how things work in most political systems today.
No, not at all. It's a powerful reminder that there are different ways to govern, ways that prioritize the well-being of the whole. And in Kimmerer's own Potawatomi culture, with its emphasis on gratitude, reciprocity, the honorable harvest, it's a beautiful example of how those principles can really become a way of life.
It's inspiring, but it's also, well, a little overwhelming. Like, how do we actually do this? Shift our own mindsets and actions.
Hmm.
It's so easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day and forget about these bigger ideas.
I hear you. It's not always easy, but I think Kimmerer gives us some really good advice. She says to start small. Focus on those everyday acts of generosity and reciprocity that we were talking about earlier.
Okay, so like planting a garden or starting a little free library or helping a neighbor.
Exactly. Those are all great places to start. It's about cultivating that mindset of abundance little by little. And, maybe, just maybe, as we do that, we'll inspire others to do the same. We'll create those ripples that spread out and make a real difference.
Okay, so we've explored these amazing ideas of gift economies and the honorable harvest, and we've even talked about how indigenous cultures offer these incredible insights into living sustainably, but now for the big question. How do we actually bring these ideas to life,
Yeah.
in our everyday lives?
Right. It's one thing to talk about it, but actually putting it into practice, that's the real challenge, isn't it?
Exactly. It's so easy to get swept up in the day-to-day, work, bills, all that stuff, and then these big ideas, they kind of fade into the background.
I know, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. But I think Kimmerer offers some really practical advice. Remember how she emphasizes that it's not about rejecting the market economy entirely? We're not talking about, going off the grid and living in a barter system or anything.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's about finding ways to create these little pockets of gift economies alongside it, like finding those cracks in the pavement where something new and beautiful can grow.
Okay, so we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're working within the system we have, but finding ways to infuse it with these gift-based principles. But what does that actually look like? Can you give me some concrete examples?
Absolutely. Think about those examples we've talked about. Community gardens, free libraries, those little free farm stands you see popping up. Those are all expressions of a gift economy in action.
Oh yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
But are they really, making a difference? Or are they just nice feel-good initiatives?
Oh, they're definitely making a difference. They're addressing real needs in communities, providing access to things like fresh food or books, things that some people might not otherwise be able to afford.
So it's about finding those tangible ways to share our abundance and meet the needs of others.
Exactly. And it really can be as simple as offering to help an elderly neighbor with their groceries or donating some clothes you don't wear anymore. It's about shifting our mindset from what can I get to what can I give.
I like that.
Yeah.
But what about those of us who maybe don't have a lot of material things to share? Can we still participate?
Of course. Gift economies aren't just about stuff. They're about sharing your time, your skills, your energy, your knowledge. What are you good at? What are you passionate about? Those are gifts you can share.
Oh, I see. So it could be volunteering or teaching someone something you know how to do, or even just, being a good listener for a friend who's going through a rough time.
Exactly. Everyone has something valuable to offer, regardless of their income or social status. And when we share those gifts freely, well, we create a much richer, more vibrant community for everyone.
That reminds me of reskilling. Can you remind me what that was all about again and how it fits into this idea of building a gift economy?
Sure, reskilling is about reclaiming those traditional practices that, that consumer culture has kind of pushed aside. Things like making, mending, sharing, learning to grow our own food, repair our own clothes, become more self-reliant.
So it's about taking back some of that control, some of that power that we've given away to a system that often exploits people and the planet.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have the ability to provide for ourselves and our communities in ways that are more sustainable, more ethical, more fulfilling. And it also strengthens those community bonds. When we know how to do things for ourselves and for each other, we become less dependent on a system that maybe doesn't always have our best interests at heart.
Okay, so we've talked about those individual actions, those small things we can do, and we've talked about reskilling. But what about those bigger issues, like poverty and inequality and the environment? Can gift economies really address those things?
That's a great question, and it's something Kimmerer addresses head on. She's very clear that gift economies can't exist in a vacuum. They need a foundation of social justice, ecological justice.
So it's not enough to just be nice to each other and ignore the systems that are causing these problems in the first place.
Right. It's not just about individual acts of kindness. It's about advocating for systemic change. It's about working to dismantle those structures that lead to exploitation and inequality.
So it's a two-pronged approach. We're planting those seeds at the grassroots level, but we're also working to transform those bigger systems.
Exactly. And I know that might sound like a lot, but remember, we're not alone in this work. There are people all over the world who are working to build a more just and sustainable future.
And I think it's important to remember what Kimmerer said about finding joy in this work. If it feels like a burden, like a chore, then it's not going to be sustainable.
Absolutely. It's about finding those things that light you up, those ways of contributing that feel good, that are in line with your values. It's about celebrating those little victories, connecting with other people who are doing this work, and remembering that even the smallest acts of kindness can make a difference.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Right. Exactly. And Kimmer's own story, her journey with the Serviceberry, is a perfect example of that. It started with her own personal fascination with this humble plant, and it grew into this profound exploration of indigenous knowledge, gift economies, the honorable harvest. And through her writing, her teaching, she's inspiring so many people to see the world in a new way, to start taking action.
It's a good reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small our actions might seem. It's about taking those first steps, planting those seeds, and trusting that they'll grow into something beautiful.
Beautifully said. So if this conversation has sparked something in you, if you're feeling inspired, take some time to think about those questions we posed. What gifts do you have to share? What small acts of kindness can you do today? And what bigger changes do you want to see in the world?
This has been such an incredible conversation. We've covered so much ground, from those tiny service berries to these big ideas about how we can create a better future.
It's amazing how it all comes together, isn't it?
It really is. We've explored those differences between market economies and gift economies, learned about indigenous wisdom, and even gotten practical about how we can actually start living these principles in our own lives.
It's been a journey, for sure. A deep dive into a whole new way of thinking about value, exchange, and our responsibility to each other and to the planet.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, the world is full of gifts, both given and received. Let's keep those gifts flowing.